All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're setting off on a truly cinematic journey straight into the heart of the world's oldest continuous geographic identity. We are digging deep into the historical materials to re-examine the roots of a place that has literally stood at the crossroads of civilization for millennia. We're going to go way past modern borders and whatever's in today's headlines to uncover an ancient, completely unbroken heritage. It's a fascinating story, so let's get into it. To really wrap our heads around this region, we have to start at the absolute dawn of recorded history. Because according to the historical texts we're looking at, Lebanon is actually the oldest country name found exactly as is in recorded history. To put that in perspective, it's mentioned 71 times in the Bible, and its famous cedars are brought up over 100 times. But even before all that, the name was carved into the Epic of Gilgamesh, which dates all the way back to 5000 BC. Think about that for a second. That means the name Lebanon predates almost every single modern nation-state we know today. Okay, so let's just go ahead and bust a massive historical myth right out of the gate here. There is this really persistent idea that Lebanon is just a modern colonial invention, right? Like just some lines drawn on a map by the French Mandate or the Ottoman Empire back in the 1920s. But the reality presented in our sources completely shatters that concept. They argue that empires, well, they don't create nations, they just occupy and administer them. Lebanon, as a civilizational core, is a 7,000-year-old continuous reality. It was thriving long before those modern empires even existed, and it kept right on going long after they collapsed. So you might be wondering, where does this incredibly ancient name actually come from? Well, the root of it is LBN, which is a Semitic word that simply means white. And it wasn't some label handed down by bureaucrats in a boardroom. It was actually coined thousands of years ago by ancient Eastern travelers and sailors. As they were sailing in from the sea or trekking across the desert, the towering, snow-capped mountains of this region basically acted as a giant, shining white beacon. The land literally named itself through its own geography. How cool is that? When you lay out the massive historical timeline of this land, a pretty remarkable picture starts to emerge. We kick things off at 5000 BC with Gilgamesh. Then, by 1050 BCE, the people living on this coast are busy developing the Phoenician alphabet. Fast forward a bit to 64 BC, the Romans arrive on the scene, and they set up an administrative province they name Syria, which our sources actually point out was a Canaanite Lebanese name for Mount Hermon. It isn't until way later, in 1920, that the French Mandate steps in and draws up the modern borders. So you can see, this identity was flourishing for millennia before anyone ever thought to draw up a modern political map. Section 1. The Unbroken Cities. Now, the sources make a point to emphasize that coastal cities like Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre, these aren't just cool ancient ruins for tourists to look at. They boast an unbroken record of human habitation stretching all the way back to the Bronze Age. People literally never stopped living there. And Beirut, which was known anciently as Berytus, that wasn't some quiet provincial backwater. It actually served as the premier legal capital for the entire Eastern Roman Empire. The Justinian Code itself was heavily shaped right there. These were living, breathing hubs of global trade and imperial law that managed to survive every single rising and falling empire. And you know, this intense resilience just kept right on going into the modern era. When the Ottoman Empire eventually rolled in, they didn't construct the unique society of the Lebanese mountains from scratch. As our materials point out, the Ottomans were basically forced to recognize what was called the Mutasarrifate, a very distinct, autonomous administrative structure. And why did they do that? Well, because the mountain society was already functioning as a separate, self-contained system. It structurally refused to be absorbed. The empire essentially just arrived, realized what they were dealing with, taxed it, and filed the paperwork. Section 2. The Golden Age of Phoenicia. All right, this brings us to a super crucial point that often gets completely lost in history. Who exactly were the Phoenicians? Were they some mysterious ancient race that just vanished into thin air? Actually, no, not at all. According to a pretty staggering 2017 genetic study by the American Association of Human Genetics, that's cited in our sources, modern Lebanese people share 93% of their DNA with the ancient Canaanites. And those are the exact same people the Greeks later called the Phoenicians. So the reality is, the people never left. And talk about an epic legacy. The ancestors of this society gave the world the very concept of the alphabet. That is the direct, literal ancestor of the Greek and Latin scripts that we are using right now. They completely mastered global maritime trade and navigation, building the very first ships capable of crossing massive oceans. They were extracting this incredibly rare royal purple dye from seashells, which became the ultimate luxury item for kings and emperors everywhere. And they built these absolute powerhouse global traded colonies, like Carthage. For a long time, they were the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean. And their absolute brilliance didn't go unnoticed by the greatest minds of antiquity either. The first-century Greek historian Strabo pointed out that history universally represented the Sidonians, meaning the ancient Lebanese, as an incredibly industrious people. He called them people of art, science, astronomy, and philosophy. I think that perfectly captures the profound intellectual and cultural dominance of this coastal civilization. They weren't really an empire of military conquest, they were an empire of the mind, of trade, and of global connection. To really grasp the physical and spiritual magnitude of their heritage, you just have to look at the ancient Temple of Baalbek. Our sources highlight that its foundation is made up of some of the most massive carved stones on the face of the earth. We are talking about individual stones weighing up to 1.2 million kilograms. This absolutely monumental site was built to honor the ancient Phoenician trinity of Il, Adon, and Ashtaroth. It's a religious structure that predates the Greek and Roman eras by centuries. It is literally the bedrock of their civilization. Which brings us to a pretty fascinating and honestly somewhat tragic question. If this heritage is that monumental, and it's so clearly proven by both archaeology and modern genetics, why is it so frequently ignored, erased, or even denied in modern times? Why bury this ancient history? Section 3. A heritage feared by empires. To understand this, we have to look at how the conflict over this identity really crystallized right at the end of World War I. At the 1919 Versailles Peace Conference, Lebanese leaders, represented by Patriarch Elias Hoyek, showed up and officially demanded their historic natural borders. They argued for a Lebanon that stretched all the way from the Upper Galilee right up to the Turkish border, and they based this claim directly on that ancient Phoenician footprint we've been talking about. And, as you can imagine, this immediately set them on a collision course with the geopolitical agendas of the major powers at the time. This bold demand at Versailles kicked off a massive clash of narratives. Now, according to the analysis in our sources, different political forces immediately started trying to fragment or redefine this unified history to fit their own goals. The sources argue that Arab nationalism sought to frame the region in a way that suppressed its 7,000-year pre-Islamic history. They also note that Syrian nationalism started promoting this Greater Syria concept, which completely ignored the fact that Syria was originally just a Roman administrative term for the Lebanese mountains. And meanwhile, the French mandate is described as purposely drawing a smaller Lebanon just to create a manageable dependency, rather than restoring those expansive historic borders that were requested at Versailles. On top of that, the historical materials argue that empires historically utilized sectarianism as a weapon. It's a classic strategy. The imperial playbook was to divide the region strictly by religious sects, Maronite, Sunni, Shia, Druze, basically to maintain control and keep the entire region weak. And that is in stark contrast to the ancient Phoenician heritage, which our sources describe as a highly secular, maritime, and cosmopolitan identity that originally united all these people, long before those modern sectarian divisions were so heavily entrenched. Section 4. The enduring identity. So how did this identity survive all of that? Well, our sources detail this totally brilliant geographic triad that basically made it physically impossible for any empire to ever truly erase this civilization. It's like a geographic cheat code. First, you have the coastal strip, which provided this uninterrupted maritime trade and a constant connection to the outside world. Right behind that, you have the towering ranges of Mount Lebanon acting as this massive, natural fortress which preserved autonomous populations through every single conquest. And then finally, tucked behind that, the inland valleys sustained a continuous, unbreakable agricultural life. Together, it formed a perfectly self-contained system of survival. As the materials we've explored today so poetically put it, empires wrote their names on Lebanon. Time erased them. Lebanon stayed. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the invention of the alphabet to outlasting the Romans, the Ottomans, and the mandates, this is a civilization that simply refuses to disappear. Which leaves us with one final, pretty massive thought to take away. If empires only write their names on Lebanon before time erases them, what exactly will the next chapter of this incredible 7,000-year-old civilization look like? Thank you so much for exploring this historical explainer with us today. Catch you next time.